Thank you very much, Katie. We're turning back to the Inside Utah Politics panel now. Tim Chambliss is an associate professor at the University of Utah. James Evans, a former Utah GOP chair. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here. The last half hour we focused on this night, Super Tuesday. Now we're projecting ahead into November. Tim, let's start with you. We have 4 candidates left on the Democratic side, and there's a divide between the ideology. Set that up for us.
All 4 have visited the state of Utah. All 4 think they can do very well here. One would suspect that the most progressive candidate, the one that's the change agent, will be Bernie Sanders. But Elizabeth Warren came here and he had a good turnout, and we've certainly seen the same thing with Joe Biden. And we also had 2 visits in January, February with Michael Bloomberg.
So as we look ahead to November, James, let's bring you in.
Okay.
Either of those 4, kind of the more liberal candidate or the more conservative Democratic candidate, which one do you think would give President Trump more of a run for his money?
Well, it's the way I would like to answer it, I think most likely would be Joe Biden, simply because he's more of a known quantity. But one I think would be the race that would be the most interesting would be between Trump and Bernie. That would certainly create more of a media flash than any of them. But ultimately, I think President Trump will beat any of the 4 because they would have a strategy for all 4 of them.
Tim, let's bring you in. Which candidate do you believe is more equipped to beat President Trump in November on the Democratic side?
Well, certainly in terms of passion and the issues, Bernie Sanders is probably going to win in Utah. Both seen as change agents, Sanders in 2020 and Trump in 2016. But all 4 will, I think, be above the 15% cutoff. Therefore, Sanders' margin in Utah is going to be much lower than what he gained back in 2016.
Let's talk more about that. You say Bernie Sanders and President Trump both seen as change agents, and there's no doubt they draw crowds when they go across the country. How would that potentially play out in a November contest?
Well, I think the reason why I'm more interested in the Bernie Sanders President Trump matchup is because we have something we can look at, and it's actually across the pond if you go to Great Britain, where you have Bernie Sanders and even to a lesser extent Elizabeth Warren offering promise in the world if you vote for them. And ultimately the voters are going to say, how do you pay for this? You know, we appreciate the offers, but this doesn't make sense. And so the conservatives, which is the equivalent to the Republicans in Great Britain, ended up taking a lot of the equivalent of Democrat seats in Great Britain. It will happen the same way here. So my focus is more on a President Trump and Joe Biden matchup, because that would be a closer race, but ultimately I think that Trump will end up winning because he has gone from an 8% black support up to 31% black support. And ironically, I think Trump will win because of a coalition of white women voters, Hispanic voters, and black voters.
Okay, I want to get more on that in a minute, but Tim, let's bring you in. Weigh in on that. Definitely, Bernie Sanders is drawing a lot of young voters.
Yes, he is.
At his rallies across the country.
And Utah is the youngest state. And if young people turn out, we could see a big support in that direction for Bernie Sanders. If we look at poll numbers, in the last 100 years of modern polling, we've never had a president, incumbent president, poll so low, never above 50% approval rating. We've had 24 Democratic candidates this year. All of them have indicated that they wanted to see the current occupant removed from the White House. And so we'd expect that Democrats who may not get their first choice will still come out and vote.
I think we remember polling when they said Hillary was going to win. Ultimately, voters are not being as forthcoming in polling as they were in the past, because a lot of voters support Trump but are afraid to publicize it because of the backlash.
Talk about that, because in 2016, polls indicated that President Trump would not win the White House, and he did.
That's correct. But in Utah, while he was a Republican nominee, he actually received about 45% of the votes that typically would have been closer to 75% in Utah.
I want to hit more on that with you, James,
okay,
because there are still Republicans who struggle with President Trump. You say you like a Trump-Biden matchup. Would Utah Republicans who are public about saying they will not vote for him, could they potentially go for Biden?
Well, I want to be clear, I like a Trump-Bernie matchup, but I'm more concerned about a Trump-Biden matchup for what you're saying is that you have more of a centrist voting element that may vote for Biden. So that will make President Trump's work a little bit harder, but I think he will eventually win because Joe Biden certainly had some negatives that he will have to answer for that he hasn't had to answer for before.
What we saw in 2016 was a historic undervote. Fewer people turned out than in 2012, despite an increase of population over 4 years. I think this time you're going to see voters energized. They're going to be going to the polls.
Yeah, what about that? Do you see that, especially if there were a President Trump and Senator Biden election? Would we see more voters energized? But also, what about the divide in the country that we might see?
Well, I don't think there's a great deal of enthusiasm about Joe Biden. I really don't think that's the case. A lot of the energy that is being portrayed about Joe Biden or the Democrats is equally matched on the right and on the Republican side for Trump. So at the end of the day, the enthusiasm level is about the same. Now it's going to come to turnout, and I think President Trump's turnout game plan is going to not be surpassed by Biden.
Okay, real quick, Tim. We heard James give us his key demographics to be watching. What do you think on that?
I think it's almost emotional. We're seeing already in the early returns that the #1 factor motivating voters in the eastern states is to defeat the current occupant in the White House, that they are angry, they are motivated, they want him defeated. And even if it's Joe Biden, maybe he's not as passionate, inspirational, he'll be the Democratic nominee.
Okay, we're going to have to end it on that note. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Appreciate your insight.
Okay, thanks.
We are now 2 hours into our live coverage here on this Super Tuesday. Still a lot more to cover. Stay with us. We'll be right back.